All right, well, let's go ahead and get started this morning. I don't need to introduce anyone because by now you all know who I am, but I'm not sure how much you actually know about what I do here in the library. So, my official title is Assistant Professor, Research and Instructional Services Librarian. And so my primary function is twofold. One, I assist students with doing research. So that takes the form of one-on-one research consultations, working the research desk downstairs, doing online chat and those kind of things. But then also research paired with instructional services is where I will, especially for grad students, so most of you probably also do teaching or have done teaching or will do teaching at some point. And depending on your discipline, a lot of faculty members might recommend you bring your students into the library for a library session where we instruct your students on how to do better research, how to do more effective searching, these kinds of things. So that's my primary job. But another big part of it, sort of a designated focus, is, well, why this forum exists, and that is I'm sort of a dedicated liaison to graduate students. So a big part of my job is thinking of programming for graduate students, how to assist graduate students. And this is a very new thing. It's only been part of my sort of profile since this summer. But with that is also sort of the mandate to assist graduate students with what we're going to be talking about today. Scholarly communications, which is a fancy library speak for academic publishing. But why we're kind of going with the term scholarly communications is that it's more than just simply publishing. It is any form of communicating your scholarly work with an audience. Now, this doesn't mean simply academic publication. Increasingly, if you've noticed, academics are trying to engage more with the public where they are. You know, this is where a big part of this is this sort of growing term like science communicators. People who try to break down scientific concepts and communicate them to the public in a way that I don't want to say is understandable, but is more layman's speak. I am not a scientist, I did not pretend to be a scientist, but I consider myself fairly well educated and fairly well read. But even my eyes glaze over if I try to read an actual, like, pure 100%, scientific publication. I'm like, I don't know what this word is, and I don't even know how to pronounce it. It's like I'm used to seeing those words on like my medicine bottles, but trying to ingredient list. Yeah, it's like I don't know. So these kinds of venues for academics to talk to a public is a growing part of what we're doing, especially as we try to not only wade through what is our modern media landscape of bad information, disinformation, misinformation, or just poor understanding of concepts. And it goes beyond the sciences, Humanities folks, humanities folks, we usually think of ourselves as like, we're more about the experience, the qualitative versus quantitative studies of the sciences. But increasingly, governments, people, like, it's all about STEM research, STEM. And humanities, we feel like we need to talk to the wider world about why we have value. And I say this as a humanities person. So, academic art, scholarly communication is all of that. Sorry, I'm trying to keep my notes in order here. Is all of these things, and I lost my mouse. And the truth of this whole matter is that you need to be thinking about this right now. I know there's a lot of things that we have thrown at you this week that have caused stress, like Dr. Beach. Yeah, I forgot your name for a second.
It's early.
Yeah, I've only had 3 cups of caffeine this morning, still need 2 more. Dr. Beach talking about yesterday about the deadlines, the paperwork, the formatting, and like I know some of you were like, what? Do I need to be done when? How? Huh? So I don't mean to add to your stress level, but it is something you need to be thinking about right now, because in a highly competitive job market, even for adjunct positions, one way to make yourself stand out in hundreds of applications, to move from that giant pile to the slightly less giant pile, and hopefully to the smaller pile that they actually call, making yourself stand out via publications, conference presentations, which is another part of scholarly communication, conference presentation, poster presentations, anything like that, is scholarly communication. It's good to be thinking about it now. So regardless of where you are in your process, regardless of where you are in your writing, your degree, whatever, it's never too early to be thinking about what I can do with my research. This goes for any term paper in any of your seminars or graduate classes. Heck, if you have that like a undergraduate thesis or a paper you're really proud of from previous degrees, think about doing something with that. You know, you've done the work already, so why not use it for something? And that's like you say, you've already done a lot of the work, so why not use it? And then, but also with this, as you're going through this week, as you've been going through, as you continue to work on your dissertation, be thinking about what am I going to do with this after I defend? One of the things that Scott and I talked about on Tuesday, is that your dissertation is not a book. It is not a book. It could be a book, but it could also be a series of articles. My own dissertation was not a book. Really, it was just a series of articles analyzing various film scores by this one person in this one era. And from that, I have divvied it up into, so far, 2 articles. There's at least 2 more I would like to, but between moving across the country 2 times and changing career focuses, that's sort of fallen by the wayside, but I would like to get back to it at some point. So you've already done all this work. Be thinking about what you can do about it and do with it. And that can even inform how you end up organizing your dissertation. You know, thinking about it as articles rather than just this giant monolithic thing that needs to be 300 pages, blah, 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 and that just stresses you out even more. So thinking about what you can do with it afterwards is a way of breaking it down into more manageable chunks. Because this is just the beginning of this process. This is the beginning of your academic career. So the decisions you make now, while they might not determine your future, can definitely help inform it. This is a beginning, not an end. To quote the great philosophers of Semisonic, from when I was in high school, every new beginning starts from some other beginning's end. I see a musician in the audience is confused by that reference.
It's early.
It's early, it is.
There's no trumpets in that song.
This is true, there aren't.
Yes. I wasn't sure if this crowd would get that joke, but after meeting all of you, it's like, no, they'll get it. Maybe my undergrads would not. So anyway, why did that not? Okay, I forgot to put the animations with that one. So we get everything at once. All right. So I've already said the book is not. That this is not a book, really. It can be, but it's not necessarily, and it is very rare for it to be a book. Part of the reason why is that the needs of a book versus the needs of a dissertation are quite different. As Scott was saying, the needs of a dissertation is to A, prove that you've done the research, prove that you can do the research, and prove that you can analyze it. It is more of an exam. You know, think of that in a lot of your dissertations. A lot of you have a requirement of having an entire chapter that is dedicated to lit review. Who's going to want to read that in a book? Nobody. Nobody's going to read that chapter. Nobody. So already right there, you have an entire chapter that is not book material. You know, unless you were one of those lucky people who your topic really has no literature to review, in which case you've done 3 times the amount of work that your peers would do for maybe half as many pages, which is the story of my dissertation. So I feel you there. So it is rare that both the material of the dissertation, the topic of the dissertation, the format of the dissertation is going to be fit for a book. In my experiences, friends that I've had that gone through the process, maybe 1 or 2 of them had something that could be a book, and they still had to revise. There's some of them are still revising from that. And so it's all about the needs of the publishers and what they will do. And most publishers will say they don't want your dissertation. They don't want your dissertation. They don't want it. There are some people who will do that. We'll get to those people, and you want to avoid those people for the most part. So if it's not a book, what can it be? Well, like I said, journal articles is what happens to most. Chapters are broken up combined or just pulled out and a few tweaks sent off to a journal for review and whatnot. A lot of this does depend on your exact dissertation format. But as I said, it's the best way to conceive of your dissertation to make it a little bit easier on yourself and not have so much stress. So regardless of what you're going to do with your dissertation, I can use the laser pointer. Whee! The next step is what you have been doing all this time, but it's slightly different. It's research, research, research. Not exactly researching a topic, but researching publishers and journals. Because the next step with anything is figuring out where you're going to submit it to. What might be the best fit? You know, you might be like, I can talk from my experience from musicology. Top journal in my field is the Journal of the American Musicological Society. Yeah, I could try to submit there, but I could count on one hand the number of journal articles that they've published just about film music in general. I think it might be 2, maybe, if that. So odds are, unless I did something truly spectacular, you know, they're probably not going to publish that. So figure out what journals are most relevant in your field, that are most likely to be receptive to your work, and see what might be a good fit. And that comes from researching that. If you don't know where to start, well, you've already done the work. Look at your own bibliographies. What are the journals that you're pulling these articles from? Look at those. And then think that, okay, that's a really good place to start. Look at those articles. Who are they citing? Where are they publishing? You know, so that is a really, really easy place to start. Also, talk to scholars in your field. You know, you all go to these conferences, you go to these things, so if you know someone, you know, like, what are you looking at? Where are you thinking about? You know, just generate lists. And usually you can come up with at least 5 to 6, which is most likely more than you'll need. Then that's a good way to do it. If you are still completely lost, there is a tool on our library website that could be really, really helpful. So one of the things that we have in our sort of arsenal of database of repositories and things is this thing called browsing. I don't use it a whole lot for actually finding articles, but what you can see is that down here is that we have categorized journals by subjects. So I'm in arts and humanities, top level. From there, I could go to music or film and media studies. And now you see this is a list of all the journals in film and media studies. It can even go even further. You know, say I'm just interested in audio arts. And there you go. There's a list of journals that I should take a look at. That's not to say that they might necessarily be the ones I'll end up, but it's a really good place to start. All right. So that is how for journals. And let's say that you are in a position to think about actually publishing a book. It's pretty much going to be the same thing. Look at your own bibliographies. For this, I would also say this is where just browsing the stacks in general within your subject, see who the publishers are, see who has published topics on this. Now, a lot of times, a lot of academic publishers will have sub-series and specialties, so it pays to do a little bit of research. Obviously, some of the top publishers you can always think of at the top of your head. What are the top universities? Most universities have their own scholarly press, Oxford University Press, University of California Press, University of Texas. These are all great places, especially if that school either that school has a specialty in your field, or if that academic press also publishes a journal that is especially in that. This is where University of California Press is a great press for a lot of things. And it's sort of right there. It's like, may not be as prestigious as like Oxford University Press, but it's no slouch. And we'll talk a little bit about prestige is something you need to be thinking about, but you don't want to spend a lot of time waiting and waiting and waiting for someone to get back to you. But again, that's kind of what we'll talk about here with placement. You should be realistic with who you submit to, but it can pay off to target top-tier publications. And I hate to keep referencing myself, but I got extremely lucky with my first publication. It's because it was kind of one of those unicorn projects. You know, I excised one of my dissertation chapters before my dissertation was even done. But one of my faculty mentors who was in film studies really suggested I submit to what was then called Cinema Journal, which is the top journal for the Society of Cinema and Media Studies. Now, I'm a musicologist. I'm not film studies. I've taken a few film studies classes, but she was like, you know, she knew that they were really kind of hurting and wanting to look at content outside that normal film and media study. So my project, which was more music focused, but still within films, like, I think they might jump on this, and they did. So my first publication right out of the gate was in the top journal for film studies. And so if you could, but said it wasn't the top journal for musicology. But so listening to your mentors can be really helpful, and it can pay off to see, like, okay, well, maybe in my exact field that my degree is in, maybe, but is there an adjacent field that I'm working in that might really benefit from this study? So that is something to think about. So you don't necessarily want to always target the top tier. Maybe look at the next level down, other smaller journals, smaller presses, but you do not want to limit yourself to that. You do not want to limit yourself to what you are thinking, like, okay, they're definitely going to take this, because you don't want to publish just for a line item on your CV. It's great to have publications, but when you go up for tenure with the tenure committee, if you're going that route, they are going to look at not only that you've published something, but where you've published it. We'll talk about things like predatory journals and stuff like that a little bit longer, and if you are not aware of these things, this is the big asterisk with everything, and buyer beware. But just because you target a top-tier journal and you get rejected, that is not necessarily a bad thing, because yes, rejection, prepare for it, get used to it, it's going to happen, a lot of it. In my career, I just got my 3rd article accepted, and I've been at this since 2012. 3 articles, book chapter, a number of other things. But in between all those things, I have gotten a lot of thanks but no thanks letters. A lot of them. And it sucks. It hurts. But even in rejection, you can get something out of it, which is where academic publishing is a lot like dating. Even though you're rejected, not necessarily a bad thing, because there is value in at least putting yourself out. Okay? Yes. You didn't think this is where we're going to go this morning, right? Because as long as it is a good journal, as long as the journal is doing their job with that sorry, thanks, but no thanks, they will give you feedback. And Scott talked a lot about the feedback on Tuesday, and it is so valuable. And sometimes it can be nasty, it can be mean, it can be cutting. Reviewer number 2 is an asshole. But even in that, you can get good comments, revise, resubmit. Or one of my recent rejections was, this is not the right journal for this. We think the research is great. Yes, there's some revisions that need to be made, some more things to think about, but in the end, this is, unless you do a complete rewrite of this, changing the focus from this to this is not the right journal for this study. Maybe you should think about X, Y, and Z journal. Invaluable feedback. Unfortunately, my co-author took it a little too personally. I'm still going to prod him to get his changes back to me, but that's a whole other story. So there are ways that taking a flyer, submitting to like the top journal in your field, they don't know who you are. Those are blind reviews. They just have an article in front of them, no name attached. They are going to give that article the same amount of attention that they would give an article by the top researcher in the field. So they're going to give it their attention. They're going to give you comments and feedback, and as long as they are, doing what they are supposed to be doing, you will get some valuable comments that will help you strengthen the article. And even if it is accepted. You're probably going to have to do revisions. You might get what's called a revise and resubmit, which is, we think this is good, we think it should be published, but you need to do and demonstrate these things first. Resubmit it, we'll look at it again, but basically it's like, we like it, we think we want it, do these things, and we want first crack at the revisions, basically. Now, getting a revise and resubmit is not a guarantee. It will be accepted. It's also not an agreement that you have to submit it back to that journal. But it is one thing to think about. Now, the last thing I want to talk about here is submission etiquette, because this can be a really stickler, and I will say it can change from field to field. But in general, the way it works, only submit to one journal at a time. You have an article, you send that out to one journal, then you wait for 3 to 6 months, hear back, and if you're lucky, it's accepted. If you're not, start, rinse, repeat. That is journals. Books are a different matter. It's a slightly different process, and I'll go into that, and it can also vary from publisher to publisher, but in general, you can submit a book proposal to more than one publisher at a time. I giant asterisk against all of this. But the reason is that whereas academic journals, you're not getting paid for this. You're not getting paid. It's like with, again, musicians, you're getting paid in exposure. That's how you're getting paid. It's the same thing as being a reviewer for a journal. You're getting paid in exposure and a line item on your CD. Books, while academic publishing, you're probably not going to see any money, but there is a lot more money involved in academic publishing for books. So if you can get multiple publishers interested in your project and get them in a bidding war, especially if it's a book that can have wider appeal outside of an academic market, then you know you struck gold. Yes?
Are you eventually going to get to conference paper submission etiquette? Because that's also a slightly different thing.
So I wasn't going to, but that is a great question. With conference papers, do whatever. I have submitted, I have presented the same basic paper at multiple conferences in the same year.
Yep.
And the reason for this is that conference papers, everyone sort of understands what conference papers are. It's like that first pass on an idea. You know, this is, usually you don't have to do as much research. You're not doing citations in a conference paper. And this is you trying out ideas you are playing with, ideas you are exploring that you're maybe not kind of 100% certain on. At least this is how in the humanities. I don't know about sciences. But at least in humanities, this is like your first pass at a topic. You're taking it to a conference primarily to get that immediate feedback from your peers. You know, you've done this work, you've done whatever, and now it's like, these are my thoughts. What are your comments on it? And then you take that, and eventually you might take it to another conference in a slightly different form, and then eventually it might become a chapter in a book, it might become the beginnings of a much larger study, and it might become a journal article or something. So with conference presentations, submit away. Especially with a lot of academic societies, you have levels of conferences. You have your smaller regional conferences, then you have like a little bit larger ones, then nationwide major conferences and international conferences. And in my brain, the way I think about it at least, it's like minor leagues and the major leagues. You slowly work through, that paper will slowly work its way up the ladder, of conferences until finally you're at, you know, whatever. I would say AMS, but AMS has never taken one of my papers because they hate film music.
They also hate organology.
Yeah. I'm a little bitter about the musicology world, just to let you know. So with submission etiquette, the thing that sucks with journal articles is that, especially in sciences, maybe a little bit in humanities, that turnaround time for journals, that 3 to 6 months, and then it takes like another 6 months to a year just to get published. All that time, your article, your research is sitting there, and who knows what's going to happen with that. And you try kind of like, This is one of the things I really need to get more well-versed at. With sciences, there is the sort of scientific practice of preprints, preprint archives, things like ArchiveX, and gosh, there's another one in sciences that I'm completely blanking on. If anyone knows off the top of their head. But it's basically you upload a non-peer-reviewed version of your research to one of these preprint servers. You get feedback on it, you get comments on it, but you're also kind of planting your flag in the ground saying, this is mine, this is my research, this is what we've done, stay away, kind of thing. You know, feel free to build upon it, comment upon it, but this is mine, this is my research. It's under review by these, it's under review in journals and blah, 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 you know, and that is sort of your way of at least establishing that you have done the research and you've done the work. Yes?
What about publishing through like a historical society, like, for example, they have Tennessee Historical Society, they have one in different areas, or those?
So I will talk a little bit about some of those other venues in a little bit, but she was asking about like sort of smaller, maybe not necessarily academic or scholarly publications, but publishing like in history, like historical societies, other sort of alternative venues. So I will talk a little bit about that at the end because there is a lot of value in that. And I think that is going to be something that you will see a lot more scholars engaging with in the years to come. And it's something I've been doing myself in various things. So I think that's all I wanted to say about submission etiquette. And again, I would caution you to talk with your advisors, talk with your mentors, talk with your colleagues about what is generally considered best practice in your field, because all of these things can have variation within different fields. This is the one thing that makes my job especially hard because I am so deeply enmeshed in the humanities, and I know sciences have a lot of other standards that I'm now just starting to learn myself. So let's talk about formatting your submissions. In general, this is where it really pays off to do your research thoroughly when you start to do the submission process. Because just like as you will discover with cover letters for applying for jobs, you want to tailor, well, basically you have to tailor it to where you're sending it off to. Every journal is going to have its own sort of little house style guides. So while, you know, there might be, you know, in English, MLA, 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 for the most part. A wonky journal out there that does Chicago because it knows what it's doing. That MLA is crap. No filter. But every journal is going to have its own little house style. And when you go to when you go to submit, you will need to go out to that journal's website and find their submission guidelines page. I just pulled up JAMS because, yeah. So what this does, it not only tells you, like, you know, in general, where's my little pointer? There it is. How many words it should be. JAMS is insane. 20,000 words for an article. That's on the high side. Most say it'll be between 7 and 13,000 at most. But JAMS is insane. So then they'll tell you like how you do it. So they're using an online service. They tell you how to format it. Like, you know, they want doc or docx, so Microsoft Word files. This is everything you see. Any text, any captions for images, diagrams, whatever, separate files. You know, they want images and all these things as certain formatted thing. You know, they go through all to like how to go through all of this, and you better follow these guidelines, or they won't even look at it. They will send it back to you and say, "Nope, try again. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200." And they'll also tell you, like, you know, so for this one, you know, list the work cited following Chicago manual style because JAMS is good with that. But they will go through all the things that you need to do to submit it and their guidelines, their styles, and everything else. JAMS does not have it, but a lot of them will have a separate house style guideline that you'll be able to download that you can see and look at it. And this is so my article that was just accepted and I just got the proofs on last week. One of the things me and my co-author had to do on that one is that since it was a journal that was published out of the British Isles, we had to go through and change all of our spellings to the British version. So a lot of extra E's and a lot of extra U's and all these other things, and so that was fun. We were like, do you have a list of the words that we need to change? So be aware of these things and make sure you are paying attention to their guidelines and their submission styles and house styles, because there might be some weird differences from what you do, especially with something like Chicago. Where is it? Are they using Chicago endnotes or Chicago footnotes? You know, or if Chicago also allows for parenthetical citations. Why? But they do. There's a whole extra chapter on that. So make sure you are following these guidelines when you do it, and it adds a whole extra layer, a whole extra step, but you need to do it because one, it's just professional courtesy, and it makes them sort of like from the get-go, it's like, oh, this person is on top of it, and it just helps the things. So that is for journals. Book proposals are a whole other thing, because odds are, when you go for book publishing, you're not going to send them the entire manuscript. Very few publishers want to see a manuscript out of the bat, right out of the gate, right off the bat. Mixed metaphors. They want to see a book proposal, which is a whole other genre of writing. So that is why when you go to start researching publishers for a book, you need to go out their website and see what their proposal form is. Now, a lot of them are going to have some of the same kinds of sections, but they might ask for slightly different things, slightly different lengths of things, and then usually they do want a sample chapter or two. But that is why, so you need to find what is essentially their author page for Oxford University Press, Author Resource Center, which, my goodness, it was hard to find through their website. But they'll have something like Author Handbook, Proposal Submission Policy. And so they go through here and tell you what it is that you need to include. So also include cover letter, copy of CV or resume, prospectus or proposal, sample chapter from the work that's available. That's the other thing, is that so a lot of times with book proposals, you don't actually necessarily have to have the book even started. Now, I would say starting out as a new author and stuff, something like that is going to be very helpful to prove who you are, especially if that CV of yours is rather thin. So having a sample chapter or two is probably, say, a good thing. But the big thing is this prospectus or proposal. Now, what that is going to include varies from publisher to publisher, but in general, it's going to have an overview of the project, which is basically an abstract, but a lot longer, where you describe what it is, what you're doing, what you're hoping to achieve with it. Usually a possible outline, with the understanding that it might change, where you describe where you describe the chapter and what each chapter is doing, what it's about in general, what you're hoping it will do. One of the really fun things they ask for you is a potential market and similar books. So looking like this book is going to be aimed at a purely academic audience, yada, 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 and some competing or similar books are XYZ. So you're going to have to do a whole layer of research for figuring out that aspect of it. And then so potential market, other competing books. Let me check my notes here. Oh yeah, a lot of popular possible reviewers. So obviously the full proposal is going to be set up for peer reviewers, and they're going to ask you who are potential people that they should contact. I've been through this process once on the reviewer side, and it's because I knew the author, we had similar overlapping interests, and she listed me as a possible reviewer. The great thing about being a reviewer on a book, usually you get free books. That's how they pay you. It means like, hey, we can give you $150 cash, or $250 of free books from our catalog. Books, please. So make sure you always, when you're going through these, look at their actual proposal guidelines, find it, follow it, and if you have any friends, faculty, mentors who have been through this process before, ask them if they have any book proposals you can take a look at and check for formatting and stuff. Think of a book proposal like your dissertation prospectus. That's kind of what it is. It's a lot like that. Any questions on submissions and this whole process? Unfortunately, I have to talk about it in generalizations because everyone is different. Yeah?
If you're going to get into this, like, please just keep going. But my question is about, I know, like, at least in my field, there's several people who publish books who previously published parts of chapters or chapters in journals. And I know that some publishers, especially like if the book publisher also published the same journal, then you can publish the chapter as it stands in a book. But then there's other rules from other journals about like copyright law, and so I was wondering if you could
Yeah.
a little bit.
That's a great question, and I'm kind of annoyed that I didn't think of addressing that myself, but thank you for bringing it up. So let's talk copyright. With everything that you publish, you are going to have to, in some degree, sign away your author's rights for them to publish it. Now, there's a lot of things that you can do, that you can try. There's like a whole author's addendum kind of thing that you can see if they are amenable to including, that sort of preserves some of your republishing rights. I need to go through the document more closely, but most publishers are going to kind of laugh at you. Open access publishers are a little bit more amenable. We'll talk about open access in just a minute. But so in general, to answer your question, it's usually not a huge problem, but it is one more hoop you have to jump through to get the journal's permission to publish it elsewhere. I've not really heard of a huge problem with this, mostly because you're not publishing the article verbatim. You're usually tweaking it, changing it, excising it to fit within the flow of the book itself. So it's not a one-for-one republishing, but you are republishing selections, portions of it, which is why if you open up a lot of books, you will see portions of chapter 3 have previously been published in X journal, portions of chapter 6 in this journal. So, but it's usually, again, because academic publishing being what it is, the onus to go out and secure those rights is on you. You can't count on like Oxford lawyers to do it for you, unless you're, famous and, and whatnot. So, I don't know, you may be famous, but, did you have a question?
Yeah. So earlier you were talking about how you published to one journal, and then later on you were talking about how you publish, or you're submitting publishing to other journals. How many papers do you usually work on at once?
For me, that is a really tricky question. It depends on what I have sort of in the hopper. With a lot of things, like I've submitted 2 or 3 like in a very short period of time, but it's usually because I have like previous work from like my dissertation that doesn't need a whole lot of revising. This last go around, I had 2 long suffering projects that I kind of had to set aside because of job moving something. So I submitted those like within days of each other. They were both rejected, and I've since revised, resubmitted one of them. That is the one that's going to be accepted. The other one, still waiting my co-author to get off his butt and do his parts. Unfortunately, he is not an academic, so prodding him is a little bit harder. So be careful who you choose for co-authors, and if at all possible, if it's a friend, make sure you have a really good friendship with them, because publishing and revising can get kind of nasty, and so choose your co-authors well. And science people, I know you collaborate all the time, and 20 co-authors on a single paper. Humanities folks, be a little bit selective. Not to mention, co-authoring counts differently towards tenure in the humanities than it does in the sciences. Regardless though, if at all possible, try to be author 1, because that's the point of prestige. If it's legitimate and you earn author 1 status, take it. Yeah. Meredith, you got a question?
Yeah, going back to what you were saying a minute ago about getting permission from a journal where you previously published, do you have to do the same thing, like, because you were saying that you published part of your dissertation before you finished the dissertation? Since we're putting our stuff technically out there to the public on ProQuest, do you have to do the same thing for your dissertation, or is it just kind of already yours?
So with your dissertation, with ProQuest, there is, and from what I remember, when I uploaded mine to ProQuest, there is a form that you can add on where you can request them to submit your dissertation to the U.S. Copyright Office on your behalf to secure your copyright for your work. Now, technically, you don't have to do this. Copyright, technically, because copyright laws in America are the way they are now, copyright attaches as soon as it's created. Now, if you don't register it, it can get a little tricky to prove that, unless, this is where some people say, mail it to yourself, get a stamped envelope that is then, dated and stuff. But there is a form that you can have ProQuest basically do on your behalf, and they will register your dissertation copyright, and you own that copyright. ProQuest does not request your copyright. You can secure your own copyright. Now, when publishing parts of your dissertation, it's usually not a huge issue. The 2 times I've done it so far, I've informed them that this is part of my dissertation. They're basically asking, is it an exact copy of it? It's like, no, it's been heavily revised. It's technically a combination of 2 different chapters that is pushed together, changed up, formed around. It's like, it's good. We don't care. Mainly because the dissertation is your own copyright, and when you essentially sign over your copyright to being published, that's that. So that's not a huge issue. Usually good to inform them of it, but especially because in academic societies or academic work, dissertations are not treated as highly as a published article in a journal in terms of categories of research. This is again because your dissertation is a whole different kind of beast, like Scott and I were talking about on Tuesday. It's a final exam, it is a tool of professionalization, it's a tool to show that you can do this kind of work, but it's not the same as an academic publication. This is also why some professors say they don't like seeing dissertations on bibliographies for the papers. I don't agree with that, but you try telling some professors that. Did I answer all your questions satisfactorily? Or is there still part of it?
That was still part of it.
Okay.
Maybe you addressed this a minute ago and I just missed it, but what if you publish part of your dissertation before you finish your dissertation?
Oh, that's fine.
Okay.
I mean, mine was accepted before I finished, but published technically after I completed it, which was really strange. But it was because it began life as a paper in a class that then morphed and changed and stuff. So, yeah, it is. It's all fine, and if you can publish before you finish and before you graduate, that's even better. And I know for some disciplines in the sciences, they kind of almost require it. I think it's kind of weird. It's or you at least to have 3 publishable articles, and ideally them already kind of submitted somewhere as part of it. I'm still kind of fuzzy, but people have told me about this at various stages when I've been there. So in terms of copyright for all of that, between dissertation and journals, it's not really a big deal, but it can be common courtesy just to inform the journal that it is excised from your dissertation or work in progress kind of thing from a dissertation that you're working on. It's just sort of professional courtesy. Okay? Any other questions about formatting submissions, guidelines, publishing copyright? Yeah.
And presumably, especially if you're publishing things before you defended your dissertation, it would always be wise to be communicating with your chair and your committee.
Yeah.
Just so you're not submitting something that they think needs more work, or.
Yeah, but at the same time, well, yes, you should always be, and hopefully this is always a conversation between you and your dissertation chair and advisors and whatnot. But the other thing is that it's also, remember, your work is going through the peer review process. So you have at least 2, if not 3 people, scholars in your field, vetting your research. And if they sign off on it, you can kind of trust that at least it's quality. But again, yes, make sure you're always communicating with your chair, because that's just, they don't want to get blindsided like that. Yeah. Any other questions on this part? Okay, so here's where we get to the after-school special portion of the talk. Let's talk about predatory journals, vanity presses, and open access. So this is the difficult part. It looks like this time I did actually do the animations. So predatory journals, what are they? What are they like, and how to look out for them? So these are a lot of times, there are a lot of what I would say not exactly good or ethical publishers out there. You may have gotten random emails from some weirdly named organization asking to publish your conference paper in whatever journal. The first couple times you get those, you're like, what is this? how's it going? Then you start getting more and more and more, and like, oh, okay, this is, yeah. So these are what are usually called predatory journals in the common parlance. Now, there is a lot of contention about this, especially those publishers who don't like that label, who try to say, no, we are completely and totally legitimate. Promise. Kind of thing. And there have been lawsuits suing various librarians for libel for basically calling these publishers out. The librarians have won because we're awesome, but still, universities don't like legal fees. So these so-called predatory journals are ones that charge you to publish in their publication. That is how they make money. They charge the authors for the most part. I mean, the standard publishing model is that they take your work for free, they get the copyright, then they charge the library access fees that we then, that we pay using your tuition dollars, and we give you access to them. It's messed up, it's screwy, but it's the model we have right now. We're trying to change it, we're trying to fight it. That's what open access is, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. We usually have to talk about these things side by side because there is overlap, but this is where it becomes, you have to do your research, buyer beware. So, but the thing is that with these predatory journals is that they charge you publication fees after little to no peer review. They might say there's peer review, but there's probably not peer review. There's little or no editing. That's why they say, give us your conference paper, we'll publish it. Like, it's a conference paper. That's a whole different format. And they really just are built upon the model of preying upon academics, especially early career academics, who need CV lines. Because in a publisher-parish environment where it's the bar for tenure is continually being raised, they know there are a lot of academics out there who just need publications, and that's who they prey upon. It's awful, it is unethical, and it is vicious. Because now that a lot of scholars are aware of this, they are taking a lot more closer examination of your CV when you go to submit for tenure. And they will check these publications, they will check these sources. And there is, yeah, they are, and if they find one, that could sink an entire tenure portfolio. It could be that but it's not saying that your research is bad. It's not an indictment of your research and what you've published. It is an indictment of the publisher and the whole system that has sort of got you caught up in it. It's sort of guilt by association. You may not have done anything wrong. It's just that, except for not clearly vetting who you're submitting to. And the thing is that sometimes it's hard to tell the difference because a lot of these journals will have very close names to legit journals. It is very, very, very bad. So beware, do your research, and just delete those emails. That's the big thing. Unless it's from a legit publisher who has actually sort of sought you out. But that's where conferences come in. But also at conferences, you find people at vanity presses. So a vanity press is a lot like a predatory journal that a lot of times they'll charge you to publish it. It's not the same as self-publishing. These are usually presses. You'll have nice bound copies of books to have. A lot of libraries even have books that are from borderline vanity presses. And again, there are ones that will challenge that contention. But a lot of times it's the same thing. They will publish with little to no editing, little to no peer review. There will probably be some sort of authored publishing fee, but vanity presses, unlike a lot of predatory journals, where they make their bank is selling very pricey books to libraries. And again, it's not to say that the research in them is bad. There's actually one that was published by Borderline Vanity Press, and I relied upon heavily in my dissertation because it was one of the few studies that had been done on it. It just had the bad luck of being published in one of these vanity presses. But again, what is the biggest thing is that they are usually some of the ones that will actually publish your dissertation as is, and it reflects in it because there's little no editing, little to no changes that have been made, and it can read like the most gibberish at all because it's a dissertation. It's not meant to be a book. We keep hammering this home this week because that's an important thing to think about. So these vanity presses, they will claim not to be, but it basically is. And you should not expect the same level of service when publishing with these than that you would with even a small independent press. And that's where you get that weird feeling. I was approached by one of these publishers at a conference not too long before I finished my dissertation. It was just someone out trolling the market, seeing what early career scholars were out there who was doing this, and they were like very interested in my project, and I didn't send them anything. I just described my project, and then I got an email a couple weeks later, it's like, we want to publish your dissertation when it's done. It's like, you haven't seen anything. And I kind of ran the other way after that. So be careful. And then there's the open access movement, which is this is the good side of it, except that for a lot of people, it can seem like a predatory journal because they do charge author fees. But what open access is, it's a way of getting your scholarship out to the masses without any paywalls. You know, we've all had that experience where you try to get a journal and then you can't get to the article because it's under embargo, under lock and key, and you have to pay for access to it. Even some libraries with level of subscriptions, we may not have access to it yet. There might be a paywall or embargo of 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 years, whatever. It's dumb, it's stupid, and because we're paying for access, you got our stuff for free, give it to us, right? So what open access does is that it puts that, they make their money, they, not make money, but they support their services. They pay for the hosting, all this thing, they pay for that by charging the author's fees. Now, if it is a legit open access journal, you'll find information about that, you will be able to research that, see all that, and a lot of times, the universities are now setting up funds to pay those fees for you. Because if they pay those fees, they're not going to have to pay the millions of dollars to Elsevier, or Springer and whatnot, all these other places, to basically provide access. It's sort of flipping that model on its head. The thing is that it's hard sometimes to tell the difference between predatory and open access journals, and it's a case-by-case basis. You need to do your research, and you need to look into these things.
Is that something y'all at the library can help us with?
Yes. Now, we don't have a dedicated scholarly communication librarian. I've sort of like been tasked this duty, at least as far as with graduate students, and I feel like it's one of those things that basically I'm going to eventually assume in some ways. I would love for us to have a dedicated scholarly communication librarian, but if you do have questions, I'm more than happy to help. So, I know we're running long again, sorry about that. So I do know that this all sounds very scary, that you will have to be on your guard throughout the entire thing. Buyer beware, caveat emptor, all those things. But the good news is that awareness is being raised, and now that you know it, you know to be on the lookout for it. Any questions about any of this? Okay. So going forward, to sort of wrap things up here, so you may be deep in your dissertation mode, but it pays to be thinking ahead about all these things. Some of you may already have publications out there. Great. Some of you may be in the process of submitting. Awesome. But you need, it pays off to be thinking about it now, especially since even though you may get rejections, it will only help your work get better, I will say. When you do get a rejection letter, don't read the whole thing the first time. See that you don't get it. Don't look at the comments. Go home, put on some soothing music, pour yourself a cocktail or a glass of wine, whatever you do to relax, meditate, yoga, whatever you do to relax, let it wash over you, put on your Alanis Morissette, whatever it is that you do, and let it sit for a couple days. Then read the comments. And you'll be able to read them, not with the sting of being hurt, but be more receptive to them. So that's the reason why you do need to engage with the comments. But to get to, I think it was your question. Oops, wrong way. Other genres and venues to be thinking about, and how to find ways of doing scholarly communication. The best way of more than just cold emailing journals, always be on the lookout for listservs within your discipline. There'll be tons of emails that will go out for call for proposals, for not only conferences, posters, but also calls for book chapters or Journals will do special issues dedicated to a topic, and they call for proposals. I got one out right now that I'm still waiting to hear back on. That is actually based on this very event. I submitted a proposal based on this event before it even happened. Because this is a cool idea, and I saw a proposal that it fit for, so I was like, dude, let's do it. So keep on the lookout for the listservs for various call for papers and proposals and everything else. Another thing is what you were asking about popular presses, more popular venues. This is, to me, the most room for growth in scholarly communication as we try to communicate to the popular audiences, the lay audiences. So if you can engage with those in some meaningful way, bringing your scholarly attention to research to the people, do it. The one thing is that it does take a very different type of writing. You cannot write like an academic if you want to get published in the New York Times, even as an opinion columnist. I have a friend from Colorado who's done a number of op-eds in various venues, and it's a completely different type of writing altogether. Some people have a knack for it, some people don't. If you don't have a knack for it, that's fine. Don't try. But if you do, if you have the ability to change voices between audiences, do it. We need you. We need you right now, because the ability to speak to a mass audience about important academic scholarly issues is the #1 critical thing we need as a society. We had those people back in the day, the 50s, the 60s. You know, we have a few here and there, you know, in various disciplines. People like Neil deGrasse Tyson who can talk to various audiences of all things, you know, but we don't have that for some things, you know. If you want to see good people doing good scholarly communication that might not necessarily have your level of education, there are tons of people out there, you know, running very high level, very intelligent blogs on topics, doing video essays on YouTube. Be a scholar in these venues. I'm not saying these people don't know what they're talking about. A lot of them really do. But you also have something to add about it because you also have the additional education. So if you have any technical skills at video, audio editing, you know, for writing in popular venues, and like start a blog, start a podcast, because one of the next things your research out social media exposure. If you want to know how to get these other venues going, you got to be out there. You got to be engaging with that audience. You know, the question came up yesterday about Twitter. I hate Twitter. I don't really use Twitter. I have a Twitter account technically, but I don't use it. Twitter is not my thing. But I do enough networking, and I hate networking. I do deal with social anxiety highly. This is fine because I'm up here in front and I'm in control. This is great. I love it. Ask me to mingle at a conference dinner. Where's the wine? Actually, for me, it's gin and tonic, but whatever. Yeah. So, but be networking. One of my most recent publications just came out a couple week ago, was in an American Bar Association magazine on music copyright. How did I get that? I had a friend who was a lawyer in DC working on intellectual property. She was one of the co-editors on the issue, and she reached out to me. I only got that line on my CV because of that. So know people, work those connections, be active on social media. A lot of disciplines have their own sort of like, you know, sub-Twitter almost. You know, those various people that work in that. If Twitter is your thing, if you can integrate that into your diet in a meaningful and not toxic way, do it. Be communicating with the audience. If you have skills, get your research out there some way, and more opportunities will follow, okay? Now, again, that's not for everybody. It's not a requirement. It varies from discipline to discipline, and if you have the talent, if you have the knack, do it. But obviously, with anything that goes out to the masses, be careful. Careful what you say, be careful how you phrase, never tweet angry, never email angry. We've all heard the horror stories of, you know, some well-intentioned academic firing off a tweet late at night in response to them and to anyone else who's intelligent marginally will be able to discern tone, nuance, all those other things, but then it gets the spin cycle and all of a sudden you have everyone weighing in on it, so be careful. And all of these things are scholarly communication. It's not just publishing in journals these days. As new academics, you need to be thinking broadly about how you publish and how you get your work out there. Yes?
If you publish with something that has to do with outside of your discipline, but it's something that's to do with your dissertation, is that something that the tenured people or whoever you're trying to get a job from will look down on?
I don't...
Like, for instance, if
Yeah.
I published with the military instead of a music journal or something.
So let's talk about tenure very briefly. And let's talk about the CV. Let's talk about this process very quickly. And we are running way over time, I'm sorry. But this is important. So with most tenure portfolios, and this I know is going to sound bad, it sort of almost contradicts some things I've said already. When you get into a tenure track position, the things that will count for tenure are usually only those things that you publish while you are on the tenure track. Anything before that is great. It helps you land the job, it helps prove that you have a track record of publication and engagement, but it doesn't necessarily count for your tenure portfolio. Usually it's only those things that count that you are publishing while you are there, that come out, that are printed, published while you're on that tenure track. This is why if people actually happen to change jobs while they're on the tenure track, one of the things they will try to negotiate is that my time on the tenure track previously counts to my time there. Because not only does it shorten the tenure track, but then all those things that you've published previously on the tenure track are counting to your next tenure portfolio. So that's thing one. Thing two. So what counts and what doesn't count for tenure? This really does vary from discipline to discipline, institution to institution, and whenever you go out for a job and you have a chance to talk with either a tenure promotion committee or look at their tenure guidelines on their website, read it very carefully. I can tell you the T&P guidelines for this building in the library can be a mishmash of things. I'm glad John is not standing right back there unless he's behind the podium. That's one of our current ongoing discussions in this building is revising our T&P guidelines. But read those carefully because they will usually give you some indication. I know that for some disciplines on this campus, it's like you have to publish 6 articles in tier whatever journals or above, like A tier journals or whatever, and they will have a list for what they consider those journals. And that's what you have, those are your requirements. In the libraries, it's a little bit more squishy, but I will say, even if something that you publish is not necessarily considered part of tenure, a demonstrated track record of engagement with other types of publications, and this also includes doing things like book reviews for journals. Look for book review opportunities because those will count. Those might not necessarily count, but all these little things that you do, conference presentations, poster presentations, publishing in like the Tennessee Historical Society journal, or like my publishing in an ABA journal, or not journal, magazine. Gotta make this distinction. Even though it did go through a sort of peer review process. All these things, all these publications demonstrate your commitment to your discipline, to engaging with the audiences, and those are things that are usually in your T&P guidelines, but it allows that little bit of like, demonstrating that you are an engaged person who is engaging with the community, not only on campus, but off campus, with other academics in your profession, and that looks really good. But it's like not one thing, but again, if you find what works for you, if it's just publishing journals and books, and you can do that and do it to the level that is required, great. If you're one of those people who wants to more engage with an audience, do that while you're also making sure that you publish enough things that are traditional scholarship to validate your existence on that campus. Okay?
Yes.
Okay. Again, like so much of this is research your discipline, research your journals, research the requirements that you have specifically. Any questions about that? Yes.
I guess this is kind of related, but I was wondering if you had advice for folks who work kind of outside the more traditional areas of their discipline in a more contemporary capacity, or even in a subdiscipline that's like very critical of the discipline itself, because sort of like bars you from the get-go from like the quote top tier journals, you know, so.
Yeah, I feel that, because I feel like that was a lot of my problem with musicology, is that film music is still kind of the academic ghetto of musicology. What? Even though it's like one of the most easiest to engage with a popular audience, like Jams is still like very Germanic in its overview of musicology.
Yes.
Yeah. So, to your question, it's going to be difficult, it's going to be tough. There's a recent case at Harvard of a scholar in like Latin and Latinist studies who was denied tenure, even though they brought her in specifically to do that, but they didn't, but like, we haven't seen the actual tenure portfolio case, but a lot of people say it's because Harvard doesn't value like those. And it's, with any tenure case, things like that, and you always do have appeals. But, getting back to your question, I would say, it's hard and I don't have a good answer, but I would say keep doing what you're doing, focusing on your discipline, focusing on your work, and publishing in good journals that sort of speak to that. And if you can, really work your butt off to try to at least sneak a couple into one of the more traditional journals. Even if you have to sort of work it and massage it a little bit more, do try to do that, because the only way that research is going to go more mainstream and those ideas are going to go mainstream in a lot of the ways is that if you do get in that top journal. Because let's be honest, okay, how many of us have subscriptions to academic journals because we're a part of society? How many of you actually read those journals? Yeah. I will scan the table of contents. If there's something that looks interesting to me, I may read it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm not going to spend my time reading an article in Jams on the show when I don't care to things about a show. So, Michaud is was it medieval or early Renaissance?
He was the cusp between the two.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I had music
He's
history
a
for.
Dr. Praker favorite.
Yeah. So anyway,
Really, first Joss Man.
You're right. Sorry.
that's neither here nor there. But the fact of the matter is that for your research to go mainstream, you're going to have to try to sneak into those journals, and you're going to have to work extra hard. I became a librarian, but I'm also much happier in libraries than I was ever in musicology, and everything I learned is applicable, and I'm discovering that my personal interests in my field were less about the specific discipline and stuff, and more about methods and how things engage with culture. So, and there's nothing to say that, okay, what is your specific discipline?
I'm in philosophy, but I work in contemporary reconstruction.
We should have coffee sometime. I consider myself a librarian musicologist, but sort of philosopher of all things. But I've never actually had formal philosophy classes, so I'm always interested to engage in philosophers and actually learn more about the discipline. So anyway, so that I would say, you mentioned deconstruction, so that makes me think of literary theory. So the thing is that a lot of these things you can parlay into other disciplines and fields, and who knows, you might end up as a professor of literary theory kind of thing. So keep yourself open to these lateral moves and thinking across disciplines, but more than importantly, do try to sneak your ideas into more mainstream philosophy journals if there is such a thing.
There is.
Yeah, I'm sure there is. Okay, any other questions? Is that a hand or just? Okay, so the last thing, publish early, publish often. Get started early, be thinking about it early. You never know what's going to happen. Hustle your butt off. Because, again, the best way to get yourself from the big pile to the small pile is by showing a dedicated track record of engagement via publications, conference presentations, and doing all the things. I am thoroughly convinced that part of the reason that helped me land this job, because it is a faculty job, I have to publish as part of my job. I have tenure and promotion reviews, is that I have a track record of teaching and publishing. And that, I think, was critical in me landing this position. So get to it, hustle, be thinking about what you can do with your dissertation, and gosh, it's almost 10 o'clock, so yeah, I think that's it. Last thing right before you leave though, make sure to please come back here for the lunch session. We will have lunch obviously. It's the main wrap up. It is where I will basically be talking about what you got out of these past 3 days, what you might think of changes that we can do for next time, because everyone is hot to try to do this kind of thing again, but I want to hear your feedback, what worked, what didn't, what things we can be thinking about for future iterations. I have a bunch of ideas myself. A lot of you have come up to me, emailed me with your ideas, but I want to discuss it, and I do have a formal assessment survey because we love data, and I want data. Plus, if I get accepted, I need data for that article. Yeah, so thank you